And good evening and welcome to what is the first of our 2026 evening lectures online, terribly advertised and sort of last minute arranged because, well, things just, yeah, things worked out that way. My name is Patrick. I'm a student and follower of Jesus of Nazareth, trying to learn from him, trying to make sense of this life and trying to draw close to the one who has loved us and who loves us all beyond measure. I'm in my, let me say, terribly imperfect pursuit of God. I have a long-standing love for his word. And for more years than anyone will care to know, I've been teaching with the British Bible School here in the UK. If you want to know more about what we do, let me encourage you to follow us on social media. Take a look at our soon-to-be completed, soon-to-be completely renewed website to keep up to date with things that are going on and see in what ways we might be of service. So, yeah, welcome to this, the first of our evening lectures online for 2026. We're planning to get back into the habit of running these every couple of months on a variety of subjects. So pleased that you're with us tonight. The plan is to open up things at the end if you have any questions or what have you. But if you want, you can use the chat window as we go along. I'll try to remember to keep an eye on it. But there we go. This evening, I'm inviting you to accompany me on a journey that I made towards the end of 2024, an unexpected journey undertaken with a degree of trepidation and considerable gratitude. So I will explain that before I begin to share with you some pictures. For many years, I had wanted to visit the site of the ancient city of Ephesus. Not only is it one of the best preserved cities of the ancient Greco-Roman world, it was also the city in which the Apostle Paul spent 3 years of his life, along with a number of other venerable characters, and from where the good news of Jesus was made known throughout the whole Roman province of Asia. So, in addition to all of this, it was the home of a group of believers in the first part of the second half of the first century AD, to whom Paul wrote what is undoubtedly my favorite letter contained within the pages of the New Testament scriptures. That is the letter to the Ephesians. So I have a number of artifacts in my collection from the era, including, and I was going to, let me quickly pop it out of the box here, including this rather splendid statuette of Artemis, and we'll say more about her a little bit later. But there we go. This is this is it here. You can take a look at it. There you go. Extra sort of. This is Artemis of the Ephesians. This is about a second or third century BC statuette there. Rather splendid article. And yeah, I've got a number of coins, hand-colored page from a 15th century printing of Ephesians in Latin, and all sorts of things. And of course, they have even more in the British Museum. Well, somebody somewhere at some time discovered that the one place on earth that I wanted to visit more than any other was the site of the ancient city of Ephesus. And this somebody from somewhere at some time proved to be exceedingly generous. They heard of a group that was to be traveling from Edinburgh at the beginning of November 2024, ostensibly to visit the locations of the 7 groups of recipients of John's Revelation letters. And they most graciously paid for me to be a part of that trip. I simply received a telephone call asking me if I'd like to go, and the rest is history. Well, actually, the whole thing was most historic. The one aspect of trepidation, however, was that I was going to need to be a part of a tour group, something which has always been sort of quite contrary to my constitution. The thing is, I can only recall one previous occasion in which I found myself in the position of a tourist, and I wasn't particularly keen to resume that identity. However, having considered this most generous offer, having undergone necessary mental gymnastics, I eagerly embarked upon was for me a journey to Ephesus, not as a tourist, but as a traveler, in the company of others who happened to be making a similar journey, many of whom I knew and loved as brothers and sisters in the Lord Jesus. So this is how the journey began, and at this stage, I will go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully, you should be able to see that. There we go. I've got a thumbs up, so that's marvelous. Okay, well, this is a journey to Ephesus with me. So this is the Turkish Airlines A321 Airbus, ready to take us to Istanbul, and yeah, well, we are off, and we're saying a farewell to the three bridges, and oh, there's the fourth. You'd like that, Andy, I'm sure. So let's take a look at a map, and just so the pilot knows which way to go. So, well, there we go, and there we are, speeding through the sky to Istanbul. There we go. Marvelous. Well, Istanbul, of course, is not the capital of Turkey, even though it is the largest city with a population of over 15 million people. Let's make the map a little easier to see. And let's see. There we go. We'll do that. There it is. And there we go. We'll see that Istanbul becomes Byzantium. And I've added the names of Roman provinces and regions, as those are the names we'll likely be more familiar with from the first century AD. Now, I spent the first couple of days of my journey in the ancient city of Byzantium. Constantinople, Istanbul, however you wish to refer to it, acclimatizing to the local culture before beginning the 700-mile road journey to Ephesus. So it really is a remarkable city, straddling two continents in which ancient and modern exist side by side. It sits astride the Bosphorus, one of the world's busiest waterways linking the Black Sea with the rest of the world. Well, sort of anyway. The city is famous for its grand bazaar. But also not to be missed is the Spice Bazaar, which has been Istanbul's major spice market since 1660, I understand. And it was beside this that I enjoyed lunch the first day at Hamdi restaurant with a chap related to the mayor of Istanbul, who has apparently since been arrested on corruption and political charges. That's the mayor, that is, not the chap with whom I was eating. Anyway, enough of such matters. Byzantium was founded by Greek colonists, probably in the 7th century BC. It was re-established in AD 324 as Constantinople. And that was during the reign of Constantine the Great on the site of the existing settlement. In AD 330, it became the capital of the Roman Empire. Well, Byzantium, Constantinople, however you want to refer to it, was one of the most prominent centers of Christianity in the early centuries AD, played a significant role in the history and development of the text of the Greek New Testament scriptures. Indeed, a significant number of later manuscripts were produced here. Well, Istanbul, or Byzantium, is the home of Hagia Sophia, a cathedral dating from AD 360, which is an awful long time ago, and it served as the religious and spiritual center of the Eastern Orthodox Church for nearly 1,000 years. I found it particularly fascinating seeing a number of mosaics depicting the phrase Mother of God, referring to Mary. You can see this here in its abbreviated form. There we go. That's the in the Greek. That's the abbreviation for mother, the abbreviation for God over there on the right. And well, we'll maybe say a little bit more about this a little bit later. But it's time that we got on with the journey. And so we must hop onto the bus and head on our way via the Gallipoli Peninsula. And then by ferry across the Dardanelles Strait to Kanakkale on the Asian part of Turkey, where we were the following day to spend an hour or so at the ancient site of Troy. Troy was repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt during its 4,000 years of occupation. Because of this, the site is divided into 9 archaeological layers, each one corresponding to a city built on the ruins of the previous city. That's generally the way that civilizations work. Homer's Iliad, you may recall, or maybe not, but he portrays Troy as the capital of a rich and powerful kingdom. In Greek mythology, the Trojan horse was a wooden horse supposedly used by the Greeks during the Trojan War to enter the city of Troy and win the war. Well, it makes a jolly good story. Anyway, the site was first excavated in 1871, and the ruins are really quite extensive, though they were badly damaged during the earlier periods of excavation. You know, those earlier periods when archaeologists thought that all you needed to do was just dig everything up and leave it be. Now, these Bronze Age walls have been repaired since that time, and a little further on, we came to the Roman Odeum. This is a small theatre where concerts, lectures, other events took place. In fact, I'm sure were we to be living in Troy in Roman times, we would be doing what we're about to do this evening right there. Well, maybe not. Until now, we've seen nothing of any ruins which specifically relates to the biblical narrative, but all of that is about to change. Listen to what Luke says in the New Testament book of Acts, and we're going to find ourselves in chapter 16. Luke tells us that they went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. And when they had come up to Mysia, they attempted to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So, passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas, and a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go on into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. Well, a phenomenal passage for a number of reasons. And I wasn't going to, but I will draw attention to the fact that this is the first of what are sometimes referred to as the we passages in the book of Acts. If you notice at the beginning, the writer, who we well understand, I think, to be Luke, says they went through the region, and then he says when they had come to Mysia. But by the time we get near to the end of this quote, when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go on into Macedonia, implying that whoever is writing this is now joining them on their travels. So that was a little bit of a little snippet there, completely for free. Okay, well, our journey continues, but bear in mind that the significance that this is where Paul sees the vision, and that really changed everything. Our journey continues. The very short distance it is from Troy down there to Troas. And it was, as we've already read here, that Paul had a vision of a man from Macedonia. This is possibly the hometown of Luke. We don't know that for sure, but in light of what we've just said about the text that we read, that's one indicator, possible indicator. Paul and his companions spent 7 days here, breaking bread, eating with the believers. And it was here where Eutychus fell down from the 3rd story. He died, but was raised from the dead. In fact, when I was there, I saw this small indentation on. No, I'm being silly, of course. That was many years ago. But what a fascinating event that must have been. And of course, it was at Troas where Paul had left a cloak with Carpus, along with some books and several parchments. We read about this in one of the letters he wrote to Timothy. Well, I did take a look, but I was unable to find any evidence of these items, so I presumed that Timothy had been able to find them and got them safely back to Paul as he requested. Now, let's have a look at just one or two pictures of Troas. Here are some ancient walls of what might have been a civic building in Troas. There's an awful lot of archaeology yet to be done in Troas. In fact, it's a little tempting. I've considered looking to see whether there might be an opening. I'd rather enjoy that. That would be a different environment from what I've previously experienced. This next picture here, it's a rather evocative view looking out across the Aegean Sea towards Macedonia. That's not Macedonia you can see there. That's an island off the coast, but it's in that direction. And it was from here that Paul set sail for the continent of Europe to bring the good news of Jesus to this continent for the very first time. And that makes it particularly significant in the story that Luke tells us in the book of Acts. However, we cannot hang around here. We have many miles yet to go. And so we are to head south towards the site of the ancient city of Pergamum. Yep, there it is. Pergamum was a rich and powerful ancient Greek city. During the Hellenistic period, it became capital of the kingdom of Pergamum. And the well-preserved theatre dates from the Hellenistic period. It had space for around 10,000 people in 78 rows of seats. And Pergamum was one of the 7 congregations to whom John wrote in the book of Revelation. Now, the city itself, the main center of the city, is centered upon an acropolis over 1,000 feet high. So you could walk up or you could take the cable car. That's what we were to do. And when one gets to the top, there are quite a number of fascinating ruins. There's that of the Temple of Trajan. And then one can go underneath through the passages beneath the Temple of Trajan. And then a little bit further on, walking all the way through that splendid passage there, one reaches another passage that leads down to the top of the theatre. Yes, we are still at the very top of the hill. So this is a view of the Hellenistic theatre at a height of 120 feet. That's 36 meters if you do that sort of thing. It is the steepest of all ancient theatres known to exist, and it really was jolly steep. And here's another view of it from the bottom. Yes, went all the way down to the bottom, and so one also had to climb all the way back to the top again. So some good exercise, and not many of us who were in this group decided to venture forth, but it was certainly well worth doing so. But we can't hang around. We need to be on our way to Smyrna. So there we go, back on the bus, and we take the road down to Smyrna. I included Thyatira there simply because it was one of those seven, the sites of one of those seven congregations to which John wrote in the Revelation. We didn't actually make it there because the bus broke down along the way. But as it happens, there's really nothing there to see anyway, so we didn't really miss anything. But we did arrive in Smyrna. And the following morning, we looked around. Smyrna's foundation is associated with Alexander the Great, reached metropolitan proportions during the period of the Roman Empire, rose to prominence due to its advantageous port conditions. You noticed, didn't you, that it was there by the sea? Its ease of defense, its good inland connections certainly added to its prosperity. Most of the ancient city's present day remains date to the Roman era, the majority from the 2nd century AD onwards, and yet again it was the site of one of those seven congregations to whom John wrote in the book of Revelation. Well, taking a little look around to the right of that picture that you can see on the screen now, we come to large storage areas underneath the agora, that is the marketplace. And when we go back up on top, we can look down at the storage areas under the agora. There really are extensive remains that are left there that have been excavated. And we could spend more time there, but alas, again, we need to move on to one of the most exciting stops along our journey, to the city of Sart, the site of the ancient city of Sardis. And this, for me, was a highlight. So you've probably already guessed we might spend a little more time there. Well, Sardis was occupied for at least 3,500 years, fluctuating between a wealthy city of international importance and a collection of modest hamlets. As time went by, it was one or t'other. It was an ancient city best known as the capital of the Lydian Empire, became a major center of Hellenistic and Byzantine culture. Incidentally, we'll say something of that in a wee moment. We will say that it housed the Temple of Artemis, the fourth largest Ionic temple in the world. And yet again, it was the site of one of those seven congregations to whom John wrote in the book of Revelation. So we're going to take a little look around, and first we're going to walk past what was once a row of shops and some houses from the late Roman period. Now, even though these are fairly late, it's worth bearing in mind that in Lydia, in this area, we find the first known use of coinage. So it's not inappropriate that we should come across a row of shops. One of those shops, I'm pretty sure it's the one with the white plaque there, and we could look at more pictures of it, but that's not really what we need to do this evening. But it sold paints and dyes and things of that nature, and well, there we go. We could. And it also had discovered within it some large sort of stone vessels with large crosses carved on them, which are certainly understood to be early Christian signs, but more of that sort of thing in just a little while. Beside this row of shops, is the largest known Jewish synagogue from the late Roman period. Indeed, the largest Jewish site known from antiquity outside of Israel. It's likely that there had been a Jewish community in Sardis ever since the 3rd century BC. And it really is quite a spectacular reconstruction. We could spend a lot of time talking about it. We could look at the at how it was when first discovered, etc. But it's a fascinating structure, and certainly very evocative of what such a building like this must have looked like in its heyday. Immediately alongside the synagogue was a late Roman baths gymnasium, magnificently restored, as we see here. But, and this is the highlight coming up. These prominent structures were little compared with what was, for me, one of the highlights of this journey to Ephesus, possibly the highlight on the journey until we arrive at the city itself. One of the reasons that I'm rather allergic to this sort of tour is that one can very easily feel as if one is part of a herd of cattle, being prodded and driven from one field to the next. And just when you're getting engrossed in looking at something, it's everybody back on the bus, and it's yeah, you understand. I mean, I'm very grateful. Please don't misunderstand. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity, but there is that aspect to it. When I discovered that this next site was not on the agenda, I was somewhat perturbed, possibly even mentally disturbed. But thankfully, I had developed a very healthy rapport with Orhan, who is possibly the most helpful and accommodating guide one could ever wish for. Knowing of my somewhat unorthodox disposition and particular desire to visit this particular site, he told me how to reach it within the 35 minutes we had available from that point until the bus was due to leave. So, walking at great velocity, I made my way mostly uphill towards the base of the Acropolis. You can see it in the background on that picture on your screen at the moment. Yes, so I walked mostly uphill to where I would find the ruins of the Temple of Artemis. It was just over 1 mile away. Now, it might be tempting to spend an entire evening discussing this particular. Actually, it is slightly tempting to do that, but I'm going to spend even less time now than I did on the day of my visit. I will say this: if you want to know all about it, there's an absolutely marvelous book called Artemis, the Temple of Artemis at Sardis, and it's a real joy. But anyway, no, I must move on. Well, a little bit move on, that is. Apart from this being the 4th largest Ionic temple known to exist, it shared a very close affinity with the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, and we'll see more about that in a short while. The goddess Artemis, this is the one in the figurine that I showed you earlier at the beginning. The goddess Artemis, worshipped at Sardis, was probably not the familiar Greek goddess of the hunt, but was rather related to Artemis of Ephesus, and also to the same goddess worshipped at nearby Magnesia. Now, in light of the Ephesian temple being virtually completely destroyed, the presence of this temple at Sardis becomes particularly significant in light of the events recorded by Luke in the book of Acts, chapter 19. And we will come to those in a little while. Incidentally, these two pillars seen standing here on the screen have been standing since antiquity. And that's quite a feat. Very often when you see pillars standing, they've been put back up on top of each other and what have you, not these. And if you look very closely between those two tallest standing pillars, you can see part of a brick structure. Now, that brick structure is a late Roman church built into the southeast corner of the temple. By the end of the 3rd century AD, the temple, which was never actually completed, seems to have begun to fall into disuse. The appeal of the cult of Artemis was diminishing, but the appeal of Christianity, as it had become known, was very much on the increase. So this church here was built around about AD 400, at the time when Christianity had not only become legal within the Roman Empire, but was growing throughout the Roman Empire. Now, the area beside this church, so that is to the right of this picture, around the eastern door of the temple, may very well have been used as something of a gathering place for these relatively early believers, as many carvings of simple Christian crosses have been found among the stonework. If you look very closely, there we go, I'll highlight a little area there. I know, we need to zoom in a bit, don't we? Let's zoom in and see if we can see some of these a little more clearly. There we go. Can you see those crosses carved into the stonework? One of them, a couple of them at least there, look like maybe actually Jesus on the cross, if that is to represent his head. These are very ancient, very early Christian symbols, graffiti, if you like. They're etched into the stonework of the temple. I wonder if they were looking to desecrate the temple in so doing. That might make some sense. I've got a few more here. Although I will confess, I didn't find these. These ones I borrowed from the book. The thing is, I had only 12 minutes at the site of the temple. And I know that I had that much time because I look at the time code on the pictures that I took. And after 12 minutes, it was time for me to head back to the bus that was over a mile away. And I'm happy to say that I completed the entire visit, a mile plus there, a mile plus back, 12 minutes on site within the 35 minutes that I was given. And I was back at the bus spot on time. I wasn't going to have anybody complain about so. Oh well, there we go. It was an absolute joy, and I'll say that I would go back to Turkey, certainly to revisit Ephesus, but absolutely to revisit Sardis. A fascinating site. Dearly wish that I could have spent more time. Indeed, I would have taken time to climb up to the Acropolis, but that certainly wasn't going to happen on this trip. Okay, let's move on, because our journey takes us through the sort of scenery which must have been familiar to those early pioneers for Christ in the 1st century, through Philadelphia, and then on towards Hierapolis. I think there we go. We'll make it if we can. Yep. There we go. There we are at Hierapolis. And literally, Hierapolis means the holy city. It was a Hellenistic Greek city, built on the site of a Phrygian cult center of the Anatolian mother goddess Cybele or Cabeli, however you want to pronounce her name. It was famous for its hot springs. Indeed, the picture there shows the calcite formations today from centuries, millennia of hot springs being coming up from the ground in there, and people today, I suppose, if you bring your trunks with you, people today take a dip in the hot springs, and well, there we go. I had no time for that, of course. There we go. So yes, it was famous for its hot springs. It's high quality wool fabrics and dyes, and yeah, they've been used as a spa ever since the 2nd century BC. Paul writes to Colossians of Epaphras, who was working hard for the believers there in Hierapolis. So mentioned in Paul's letter to the believers in Colossae. And it's believed that Philip the Apostle was martyred here, and that his tomb lies at the center of a 4th or 5th century basilica. Take a look at that in a minute. One thing that's particularly impressive in Hierapolis, apart from the hot springs, which are impressive. One thing that's particularly impressive is the Roman theatre. Isn't that a joy? Look at that. And it's absolutely spectacular. Of course, it has been, we say reconstructed using original material, much of which had fallen. But let's zoom in a little bit there. Look at that. Isn't that quite a very impressive structure indeed? One climbs up to the top of the hill to find this. This is believed to be the tomb of the Apostle Philip at Hierapolis. That's not Philip, who was one of the 7. This is Philip, one of the 12. And this is sort of built into this 4th or 5th century basilica. It's all a part of that. And but of course we can't hang around. We need to pop just down the road to Laodicea, and it really is a very short trip down the road. Laodicea was a rich ancient Greek city in Asia Minor on the river Lucas. At the end of the 3rd century BC, Antiochus the Great transported 2,000 Jewish families to Phrygia from Babylonia. It was closely associated with the congregation at Colossae, to whom Paul wrote a letter. And you may recall he speaks of them reading the letter that he sent to the Laodiceans and vice versa. And of course, it was the site of one of the 7 congregations to whom John wrote in the book of Revelation. We've not yet reached all 7, but you're getting there, aren't we? This is it's quite an extensive site, and there is a absolutely splendid church built during the reign of Constantine. Undercover here, just but it's quite a huge structure. There is at the back of this picture a dunking tank, dunking bath, baptistry, if you like religious terms, there inside the church. And so my understanding is that one walked down one side, back up the other, and there was a lot of ceremony apparently attached to it there. But that is a very early baptistry there in the church there. And there's also a Roman theatre. This is, remember there was a theatre, but this is the Roman theatre here in Laodicea. And we're looking out there towards Colossae. It's rather fascinating to see the close proximity of some of these places. So Colossae there, it's there in the background, that hill in the background of the picture. However, there's very, very little to see of Colossae. The modern town is built right on top of the ancient town, so the only way to excavate it would be to ask people you know, to move out. And there we go. They may not anyway, so that's fine. But that's where it is. Get the idea of that sense of proximity there. Well, so much more to see, but alas, one was herded back towards the bus, towards the coast, as the ruins of Ephesus were getting ever closer, and so we head westward now towards the coast, towards the city of Ephesus. And it looks as if the journey to Ephesus is coming near to its conclusion. The history of Ephesus dates back to the second millennium BC, centers around its geographic importance, its religious significance as the home of Artemis. It was the largest trading center in Western Asia Minor, the provincial capital city. Ephesus was the third largest city of the empire. So very, very significant, significant site, and so terribly well accessible, preserved. I was going to, because no recent structures have been built on top of it. And though an extensive amount has been excavated, there's still a lot more to be done. Paul spends more time here than in any other city during his travels. Yep, Ephesus was the site of one of the 7 congregations to whom John wrote in the book of Revelation. I think we've totted up all 7, if I'm correct. There we go. Well, here's a splendid view, one which we may have seen before, because lots of pictures of Ephesus one can find online, of course. Looking down the main street from the east, there we go towards the library there down the bottom. Looking aside, noticed some early Christian symbols. So the one on the right looking like a pizza, that's an early Christian symbol. There was one very similar to it in it was Laodicea. I didn't have a picture of it on here, but and then you've got that ichthus there, that Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, in the acronym there in the Greek, spelling out the word fish, and you've got there on the bottom left a picture or two of a fish. That fish symbol was another early Christian symbol. So, well, who knows when they would have been carved there, but possibly to give indication that there were believers who were meeting there all those many centuries ago. This is the Bouleuterion. This is a little theatre. It was quite enjoyable to explore. Those who wished to take the effort and climb up the steps. It wasn't terribly large. It housed the meetings of the council and other civic affairs. Then a little further on, we come to the Temple of Domitian, at least what's left of it. And then continuing down towards the library that we saw earlier, this is the 2nd century library of Selcus or Kelkus or however you want to pronounce that. Nobody's taking score here on that count. But it's 2nd century AD. We should elaborate perhaps. This was not there at the time Paul was there, or any other of his companions in the 1st century AD, even though it's perhaps one of the most famous views of the ancient city of Ephesus. There's a lot that could be said of this, but of particular interest to me was in the middle of the picture. nothing terribly dramatic to see, other than that there is there a wall just sort of very slightly to the left of the library there in the middle of the picture is quite possibly the location of the School of Tyrannus. So it's not a certain fixture, but it's quite plausible. One of the connections being that this area was considered as sort of a center of learning, hence the presence of the later library and what have you. However, if we were to turn to the right and walk a little bit down the street, and then to our left, we'd come across another symbol carved on a paving slab. And, well, it is generally understood that this symbol here was indicating a house of ill repute. And it was very close to the just the other side of the commercial market place. So, yeah, it was believed that was some sort of a brothel or what have you. Looking back from here, you can see the library there just to the left of the picture. We're looking across the agora, the commercial market there. That's where we're looking across. And then if we were to turn around, we'd find ourselves pretty much facing the great theatre of Ephesus. And absolutely marvelous. I mean, it's huge. It is huge. Say more about this in just a little minute. After we step back to the agora, to the commercial market, and we're going to look from there. Can you just see in the middle of the picture, slightly to the left, you can see a little bit of the theatre. Now, I found this very enlightening. And the reason is that here in Ephesus, in the first century, the beginning part of the second half of the first century AD, there was a notable riot that took place in the theatre. I'm going to read a couple of well, it's lengthy. It's not terribly lengthy, but a couple more excerpts from Luke's book of Acts. About that time, he says, there arose no little disturbance concerning the way. For a man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the craftsmen. These he gathered together with the workmen in similar trades and said, Men, you know that from this business we have our wealth. And you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a great many people, saying that gods made with hands are not gods. And there's a danger, not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis may be counted as nothing, and that she may even be deposed from her magnificence. She whom all Asia and the world worship. Did I say magnificence? That's what I meant to say. Something didn't sound right there. Okay, so that's that Luke introduces this episode. So you've got these craftsmen. Demetrius, he's the ringleader. He must be in charge of the union or what have you. They're making these. Well, he's making silver shrines. Others in similar trades, they would have been making things just like this statuette that we looked at earlier, and they're making money, out of their religion. I mean, nothing's new, is it? Okay. So that's how they're making their business. That's how they're lining their pockets. But this troublemaker, this Paul who's preaching this message about Jesus of Nazareth, he's costing them money. And this danger that the temple might even be counted as nothing. Okay, so Luke continues. When they heard this, they were enraged and were crying out, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" So the city was filled with the confusion, and they rushed together into the theatre, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians who were Paul's companions in travel. But when Paul wished to go in among the crowd, the disciples would not let him. And even some of the Asiarchs, who were friends of his, sent to him and were urging him not to venture into the theatre. Now some cried out one thing, some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and most of them didn't know why they had come together. I do find that amusing. Some of the crowd prompted Alexander, whom the Jews had put forward, and Alexander, motioning with his hand, wanted to make a defense to the crowd, but when they recognized he was a Jew, for about 2 hours they all cried out with one voice, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." And well, what a scene! What a scene! Now, back again, this is a different picture, but this shows very clearly the agora. This is the marketplace. Right behind it, you can see there, right behind is the theatre, the great theatre here. Can you picture nearly 2,000 years ago, as Demetrius and all of his fellow tradesmen, maybe they meet together every day for a cup of coffee and whatever they do there, and they're talking, we're losing money, so are we. Why? Well, where's all the business going? It's this Paul of Tarsus, and so you can imagine how this crowd gets stirred up, and their livelihoods are under threat. So they're motivated by money. Of course, they say that they're concerned about the temple of Artemis and what have you. But they're only, I think we would call virtue signaling. They're concerned about the money in their pockets, all right, and they're losing business. They're going out of business. So it's not a great distance from the theatre here. From the marketplace here. They get a hold of Gaius and Aristarchus. They drag them there into the theatre, just across the road. I found this incredibly enlightening, just seeing how close these were together, and picturing this riotous mob who get together, and Paul somehow just outside the theater, just outside of this crowd, wanting to get in, but all of his friends saying, don't do it, they're going to kill you, they're going to, and I just found it awfully exciting. I really did. That for me was certainly something of a highlight, seeing how this would so easily have happened, from the marketplace to the theatre. Well, we've got to move on because the shops will be closing very soon. So just a little bit down the way from here, we come to what's known as the church, or the Basilica of Mary. This became renowned as the site of the Third Ecumenical Council of AD 431. If you go in for those sort of things, it was at this council held here in Ephesus, understood to have been on this very site, where the question of the Virgin Mary being the Mother of God was debated. And it was decided there in the first half of the 5th century AD, that Christ had a double nature as both God and man, and the Virgin Mary was known as Theotokos, or God-bearer. So that's a little bit of that sort of historic theology, as it were. And, we might argue, well, that none of that makes any difference. It's what the scriptures say that counts. Of course it is. But that's where that evidently took place. But from one basilica, we leap to another. After driving into the modern town of Selkirk, one finds the 6th century Basilica of St. John, as it is known. And it is there within that basilica that you'll find the tomb of the Apostle John. And there's a reasonable likelihood that it is his tomb. The basilica here was built on the site of an earlier wooden structure which had been there for a long time. And there's reasonable evidence to support that both Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the Apostle John were in Ephesus until the end of their days. So from here, if we turn around and look back in the direction of the ancient city, what can you see? Huh? There we go. Look at that picture very carefully. Can you see it? Huh? I'll move it a little closer. Can you see it? There we go. A little closer. There we go. That's it. Okay, I'm going to make it really easy for you. I can see we've got some squinting here, looking. What on earth are we looking for? I can hear you thinking. Well, there we go. That's it. You mean that pillar? Yes, that pillar. Yes. And I'll hasten to add, it's a reconstructed pillar. This is all that remains of what was once one of the seven greatest wonders of the ancient world. This is all that remains of what was once the largest building in antiquity. This is all that remains of the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. That's it. Isn't that amazing? I'm somewhat amused when I recall the words of Demetrius about his concern that the Temple of Artemis might come to nothing. So there we go. For a better view, you're going to need to visit the British Museum in London because this is the base of one of the sculptured pillars from the Temple of Artemis from Ephesus. There it is, and it's on view. In fact, I saw that, I think it was last Saturday, so it's still there. And all of this brings to mind a passage from Paul's letter to the Ephesians that is an absolute joy to read within this whole context. Paul was writing this letter in probably the early 60s AD. And he writes to them about their background of Jew and Greek. In fact, Luke makes a point when he's writing in his book of Acts that there were in that area both Jews and Greeks. So he makes, and Paul picks up on this in his letter to the Ephesians. He speaks of them having been made out of two into one person, as it were. And this is what he says. For through him we both have access in one spirit to the Father. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but your fellow citizens with the saints, members of the household of God, built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Paul is writing to believers in Ephesus who would have been well familiar with that temple, which in their day, in the first century, stood in all of its earthly glory. They would have known it well. And Paul is writing to the believers in that city of another temple, a temple which God himself was building, not one made out of stones, but as Peter would say in his letter, made out of living stones, made out of people, made out of followers of Jesus. You are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. And this is an amazing truth for those who are found in Christ today. We, in him, are the greatest wonder of the present world. So much for that temple of Artemis in Ephesus, that one miserable reconstructed pillar. Oh, no. we are the greatest wonder of the present. There's nothing arrogant about that at all, not one little bit of it, for this is the work of God by his Spirit. Isn't that amazing? Well, I rather like that anyway. We've got one final stop. Ah, yes, alas, we do. But it's connected. It is connected to all of this. We're going to hop back on the bus. We're going to hop back along the road from Ephesus to the city of Miletus. Miletus was an influential ancient Greek city, a major center of trade, culture, innovation. It was established, well, the city itself I was established dozens of colonies around the Mediterranean and Black Sea, a very influential center. And it was at Miletus where Paul gave a most emotional farewell to the leaders from the congregation at Ephesus on his way to Jerusalem. Do you recall? And Paul later left Trophimus, who was ill at Miletus. So a very, very quick look around Miletus. Firstly, we can't miss the 3rd century BC Greek theatre. And if we had time, we could explore all of its subterranean passages, and it's really quite a marvelous feat of engineering there. But there's one seat in particular to which I want to draw your attention because it has an engraving on it. And the engraving on this seat, there we go. Can you see it? It says, we'll do it in English, place of the Jews, who are also called God-fearing. So evidently this section of the theatre was set aside for Jews to sit and watch whatever spectacle. Of course, I had to try it out to make sure that it still works. And yes, it does. It still serves well as a seat today. So there we go. I had another one of those moments at Miletus where there was somewhere else that I really wanted to see that was not on the agenda, but all was well because I can walk jolly quickly. And so I headed off from here and headed to the harbour. And this is all that we really can see. This is a monument that was erected by the city of Miletus in the 1st century BC. But the harbour at Miletus, this is where Paul, he stops on his way back to Jerusalem. He meets with the leaders from the assembly at Ephesus. Why does he not go to Ephesus? Quite possibly because he's on a large boat and the harbour in Ephesus was already beginning to silt up by the middle of the 1st century AD. Indeed, that's really why the city fell into disrepair and was abandoned, because the harbour simply silted up and they could no longer afford to dredge it as they had to do. Miletus was still open for business, and it's here where Paul makes a most emotional farewell speech to the leaders from Ephesus, probably around about AD 57 or so. But you can read that in Acts chapter 20, and it really is. It's a very touching tribute there. But this is where I must make my slightly less emotional farewell this evening as the sun sets across the Aegean Sea at Kusadasi. That was our last stop, just down the road from Ephesus, down the road from Miletus. That's where we're going to say cheerio. Encourage you, as always, to follow us on social media. We don't use Twitter very much, actually, but the others are still absolutely up and running. You may already know about our friends of the Bible School. You can find out about that on our website. And it leaves for me to say thank you for being with us this evening. I hope you have enjoyed a little journey to Ephesus.